Okay. Yeah. So, hi everyone. This is Ravi. I put my introduction in the Facebook channel as well. And my whole aim today is just to kind of walk you through a very simple coding exercise. And what I want to do is just uh, help you out in understanding how to write programs and how do you code. Right. And if you have any questions, just like put it on chat. I'll be using the chat window to see if there is any question. I'll be answering those questions as well. Yeah, and good evening to everyone. So, eventually, I wanted to cover a few things, and this is a very short session. It will be for 30 minutes. And I want to get feedback from everyone as to if this seems useful to all of you or not. So, please give me some feedback later on as well. So essentially, the idea here is we will try to write a program. Like I'll just write a program and give you an idea of how we go about writing a program, how we go about solving problems, and in as we kind of progress in this like in this set of series, you will see we'll go to more complex problems based on what people want to what people basically want to solve. So this is like one sample question that I have on this hackerearth.com, which is a practice platform. And the question essentially is that you are given a string. A string, you can imagine it as being any series of characters in English. And what you need to figure out is basically try to figure out whether the string is a palindrome or not. So this is like a common analytical exercise, and the idea is that what is a palindrome? So any string which is same from the front and the back, right? So essentially a string like ABA is a palindrome because if you look at it from the left side or if you look at it from the right side, it's just the same. So you can reverse the string and the string will remain the same. So that's the definition of a palindrome. And what this program one has to do is it will try to get an input string and it has to output whether the string is a palindrome or not. So that is the question that this string or that this program has to do. Now, before we try to write a program, we have to decide on a few things. So one is essentially what language is in which you want to write a program, and you can see in this particular site or in this particular web tool, there are multiple types of languages, and we'll go through like different types of languages as we progress. Like I'm more comfortable in C++, I'm just using that as a language. And eventually you can write a program in all the different languages. So you can write a program in Java, you can write a program in Python, so on and so forth. And initially I'm just starting with the very basics. So even if you know it, just be patient and then we'll try to go to more complex over different days, right? Or more complex problems as well. So eventually, what is a program in computer science, right? Or in computers, what is a program? So program is essentially a way that and so program is basically encodes a series of steps in which you can solve a particular problem. So for example, a program can be written to add two numbers, right? And the idea within a program is it'll be a series of steps in which you can write instructions with which computer can solve a computer can solve certain set of problems. So that is the definition of a program, and a program consists of a lot of different things. So program basically in computer science consists of a body, a set of headers, an input, and a particular output, right? So in this particular example, the input is essentially a string S, and the output that is expected is essentially either a yes or a no. That is the output. And there are certain constraints on the string. So the constraint is that the length of the string will always be within 1 to 100. So that is a constraint that is put. So now how do we go about solving a program, right? So essentially to solve a program, you first have to introduce within the program certain sets of headers in the program. So what is a header? So essentially what I'll first try to do is write a couple of headers, and given this is C++, so then there are headers that are pertaining to C++. So one of the headers is basically IO stream, and the other header is string. So essentially in this particular program, we'll be manipulating strings and using strings to basically figure out whether this particular string is a palindrome or not. And we'll also be using certain functions of the strings. So if you see the include method, basically, or the include word that is there, basically says that I want to include the headers of a particular type. And the IO stream header in C++ includes certain operations like looking at input and also emitting an output. So that those, and the string headers basically introduces a library that can help you manipulate strings. In a C++ program, you basically have an int main. The int main is the main function. So what is a function in computer science? So in a program, a function is basically a method by which you do certain things. So you can write a function like an add function that can take two numbers and return a number. You can also write a subtract function that can take two numbers and return a subtraction of those, or a difference between them. And the syntax of a function is essentially you have the return type of the function and the name of the function, which is main, and then the syntax has a braces that define it. So what I'll do is I'll write an int main, which is the main function from which the program starts, and then I'll first try to declare a string. So basically I've said that there is a string which has a name s, right? And then I'll try to read the string, because the string has to be read from the input. And so the cin command is the standard command in C++ with which you can actually read strings. So what this is saying is that whatever input is given to the program, put it into the letter or the word s. And then what I'll do is I'll write a different function. The idea of this different function would be to figure out whether this string is a palindrome or not. So I'll write a different function, and this function will take the string s and will decide whether this string s is a palindrome or not. And it also is giving a bool output. So bool is essentially in computer science something that means whether a variable is true or false. So that is what bool means. And the way programs are constructed is that you can construct many different functions in a particular program. So there's a main function that can call a different function which is doing some other job. So now what I'll try to do is within the function, I have also given these input parameters. And the idea of the input parameter is essentially the input that is given to this function to decide whether the string is a palindrome or not. Right. So to decide how do you figure out whether a string is a palindrome, you need to come up with an algorithm. So algorithm is a series of steps which will decide whether the string is a palindrome or not. And so in our particular example, or in our particular problem, what we need to do is we need to look at each variable or each character from the front as well as the back and compare whether those characters are same or not. Right. And so the algorithm will be very simple. We will have a way to look at the first letter and a way to look at the last letter and compare if they are same or not. If they are same, then we look at the second letter and the second last letter and then compare whether they are the same or not, and so on and so forth. And if we look at all the letters and they are the same from the front and the back, then we'll basically say that this is a string is a palindrome, otherwise it is not. Right? So this is an algorithm that you need to come up with based on the question. And this requires a little bit of practice. As you kind of practice these questions, you'll be able to come up with these algorithms very, very quickly. And then you can encode them or write them in the program. So what I'll try to do is I'll try to encode this in the function. So first I'll try to figure out what is the size of this string. So the size of the string is given by this function, which is s.size. Then what I'll try to do is I'll try to run a loop over the size of the string. So what this loop essentially would try to do is it will look at all the characters from the front as well as the back. So to do this, I will declare two more variables. So the first variable is the start variable, which is saying that the start should start from index 0, and the end variable should start from size s minus 1, because you want to look at from the last, right? So these are two variables, and the idea, what is a variable in a program? So a variable is an entity that can hold a value, and the value can be held, and the value can be changed over time. So start की जो value है, it will keep increasing, end की value will keep decreasing, and that's how you will look at both the start and the end characters. So I'll introduce this concept of a loop as well. So the idea of a loop is you can encode something in a loop that can go on multiple times, right? Because we need to see both the start and end, and they should converge to the same value, right? So this is kind of getting into a little bit of complexity, but I'll try to explain as much as possible. So this loop basically says that whatever is within this bracket, keep repeating till start is less than end. And to initially start will be 0, end will be 2 for this particular example, and so this program will go into the loop, right? So what I'll try to do next is essentially try to check if the value of the string s at start, so this is the syntax for checking a value at start, is if it is not equal to the value of s at the end, then I'll try basically to say that this is not a palindrome, because let's say there was a string which is AB, right? So then the start key value will be 0 and end will be 1, and A will not be equal to B, right? And that is how we basically detect that this is actually not a palindrome. So we'll say return false. So what this basically means is that if you hit a condition where the start and end are not equal, then this function's value is false, because the string s is not really a palindrome, and basically main which will call is palindrome will actually know that actually the string s was not really a palindrome. But if this is not the case, which is basically saying that start and end were equal, then we basically need to look at the next set of characters. So to look at the next set of characters, we basically have an increment on start, and as we initially said, right, that variables can change values. You can see the variable start changing value and the variable end changing value. And we are moving end from the backwards direction, start from the forwards direction. Right? As a human being, we also try to detect palindromes in the same way. Right? So program has to just do the same. And if we get out of the loop, then we say this is true, which is also kind of interesting, because if you looked at all the characters and you found them all equal, and you've looked at all possible characters, then it has to be a palindrome. There's no other condition, right? And once we have done this, then this particular is palindrome function is done. And now you can say, you can actually call this is palindrome function by just passing in the string s. And initially what we decided was that we will print. So the way to print or emit out something is by using the word cout. And if it is not, then we emit out no, which is the definition of the program. So some of these words essentially like cout are basically keywords that are already defined in C++, and they are being used or already defined in this IO stream. And so that's how they are being actually used. And the definition of string is being defined in this library called string. And there's one more caveat that we need to be aware of, which is using namespace standard. And the idea here is essentially to be able to say that the string variable could also mean different things in different libraries. So to be able to say that we need the standard definition of string, we basically have to include a namespace as well. And we'll go into more detail as to what a namespace is. It's a little more complex construct, which basically ensures that we are looking at the right string variable, right? And now our program is complete. You can see you actually have to return a 0 as well. And the idea is that since the main method has an integer, returns an integer, we need to return a specific integer value. And this is the standard definition of main program. The idea is that if the program fails, you can return a -1 or a non-zero value, and if the program passes, you can return a 0 value. And this is just by convention. There's no right or wrong way of doing it. It's just by convention that it's defined in C++, right? And now what we try to do next is essentially try to see if it compiles. So we'll just try to see, okay. So it does compile, and we can see it has passed all sample test cases, and it has passed the test cases within within zero point 0.1 seconds, right? So that's what it did. And to do one more thing that we usually end up doing after you write a program is try to do a like a dry run of the program. So essentially, you can just take this in your mind. You can just take this string, which is ABA, and then try to run this through this program that we've written, right? So essentially, what will happen? So what will happen is that the user will get an input, or the program will get an input S, and then the program will run, and this is palindrome function will be called, which will try to look at S, and the size of S will be 3 because ABA has 3 characters. Start will be 0, and this will be end will be 2. And so it will go into the first loop. The first loop will be while 0 is less than 2, and then it will try to check whether is start is not equal to is end. The start value is A, and the end value is also A. So it will go here in the else loop and will increase start and reduce end. So both of them will become equal to 1, which is basically saying you're looking at the same character, so you don't need to compare. And then this condition will fail. So this is basically a way of testing the condition, and then it will return true. And once it returns true, we'll just output yes. Otherwise, if there is another string, this will output no. You can run the same experiment or the same dry run with a string called AB, and in that scenario, what will happen is that the start, this condition, if S start is not equal to S end, will be true because A will not be equal to B, and you will return a false, which will see out a no. So that is the whole idea behind writing these programs. And now, like, just using this idea, we've been able to actually solve a problem in a real world, right? So if you have to look at certain sets of strings which are same from back or not, this becomes like a real world scenario which can be used in like DNA fingerprinting to be able to see whether the DNAs are equivalent or not from the front or the back. So this is pretty much it as to the first tutorial that I wanted to give, and this is just a pilot and a dry run of what I want to do going forward. If you really if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'll be happy to answer the questions. If you did not understand anything within this program, or how did this program run, how was it compiled, or anything else, I can answer it right now. I'd be happy to do that. You can put it on chat as well if there is any question. Otherwise, I can finish the tutorial. Yeah, so let me just quickly answer the first question, which is from Mashudosh, which is so essentially, and then I'll come to your question as well, Vishal Kumar. So essentially, the idea here is that this is the function definition, wherein this is the return type, this is the name of the function, and this is the input. And the way you define the input is essentially you will try to say that I want to pass in an input of the type string. The name of the input is f. You can name it anything, but it has to be same within this particular part of the function. And const basically what this means is that the string s will never change within the scope of this function. So when this function is running, the string s will just remain the same as what the input was. And what this basically is basically saying that we don't need to copy the string. So when you are passing the string from this to the function which is palindrome, you can pass it in two different ways. So one is you can copy the whole string, so you can pass in the characters a b a, or you can also pass the string by reference, which is basically saying that in the memory of the computer in which this program is running, the string is stored somewhere and you can just pass the address. So basically this is what the idea is, that I am passing a string s, which is a constant. It does not need to change, but the string s does not need to be copied. It just can be passed by the address. So it's basically just saying that if I want to say where you live, I can either give the whole path or I can give you the address, right? So essentially the address is tends to be very easy to give, right? So that is the idea. I'll share more resources as well to explain this. The idea of reference is a little more complex. That is one. And if you have any other question, Vishtush, feel free to ask on the chat as well. I'll be happy to answer. And so Vishal, around the mobile application development, I'll let you know on the WhatsApp group. Initially, I was just trying to get started with very simple programming constructs. But if more people are interested in mobile application development, I can take a set of classes on it as well, and we can develop one simple mobile application, like a hello world kind of application that will give you an idea of how mobile applications are developed in real world, right? Uh, and if you're just interested in that, let me know. I'll also send out a form on the group and see what people are interested in. And if people are interested in, a lot of people are interested, then we can definitely cover that. At this time, I'm just trying to give you a flavor of how programming is done, because this is the most, like most of the companies, when you go to these big companies, or they will try to ask you these programming questions, and you have to be very quick at doing this. So maybe just this program has to be completed in 5 to 10 minutes. So if you can learn that, then you have good chance of like building applications as well as like clearing interviews. So that's pretty much where I want to help out people with. Right. Okay, I think I'll then just close this session. Just